A package from Canada. What could it be? Ah, finally, a delivery from Amfeltec. They may have the weirdest name in the industry, however, they do make some really nice products. Their Squid Carrier Board family has a bunch of different M.2 to PCI-express cards and boards, like this one with 1 or this one with 2 M.2 SSD drives. The one I have here is actually this one, which has 6, 3 on each side, and can reportedly do 10 gigabytes per second on Mac and about 14 gigabytes per second on Windows systems. This video, like all my other ones prior to it, are not sponsored by anyone, including Amfeltec. I paid about $750 for this card, and today we're going to review it. You can tell that they are an engineering company because they literally just wrap this in some bubble wrap and put it into an anti-static bag. The packaging is completely uneventful. Similar can be said for the card itself. Outside of this kind of cool tentacle cutout on the board, it really does look like a packed together piece of kit that maybe you should think twice before putting into your computer. However, don't judge book by its cover, I think applies here as well, because as you will see in our tests, this little guy is freaking amazing. One other thing in the box are these heat spreaders, which you can paste on top of your M.2 SSD drives to provide some extra heat dissipation. In my opinion, as you will hear later on, I really do not believe that they provide that much benefit whatsoever. At this point in time, I only have 4 2TB 970 EVO Plus SSDs, and we will use 4 of these to test. This particular card can actually hold 6. In the future, I will add 2 more and rerun some of the tests. However, as you will see from the tests coming up, it is quite easy to interpolate how much faster this particular card would be with adding 2 extra more SSDs. Surprisingly enough, the speeds Amfeltec advertises are actually quite achievable on this. As this was my first time putting SSDs into this card, I tried to use screwdriver, but really you can just hand tighten all of them and that should be plenty. And here's the whole board assembled. We have 4 M.2 SSDs in, and we have 1 slot empty on one side and 1 on the other for expansion. Amfeltec told me that I should be okay disconnecting these fans, which later on I actually removed completely, since in a 2019 MacPro there should be enough air coming from the front fans and going through the case to cool everything properly. When looking at the board, the only thing I really didn't care much about are these tentacle cutouts, because once you remove those fans from the back, the structural rigidity of the board is pretty much inexistent. It just becomes completely flexible. For the amount of money this board costs, I did expect it to be a little bit less flimsy, and maybe they should really consider including a very nice large heatsink on top of it, like how OWC's Accelsior does, because one thing this board can use is a little bit better cooling. The reason for extra performance also is that this board has 16 PCI lanes versus 8 on OWC Accelsior. As I alluded to earlier, these super tiny aluminum heatsinks are extremely little, and I really do not believe they provide much heat dissipation whatsoever, especially if you paste them right over the stickers on top of your SSD like I am here. For our testing purposes, this is just fine, but for real production use, I would recommend removing the stickers off of your SSDs and potentially putting some bigger heatsinks if you can fit them into your case. As you will see, because this is a double-sided board, it does not leave all that much clearance for other devices if you're using the adjacent PCI-express slots. The culprit is this weird offset PCI-express connector, which doesn't sit flush with the board. My recommendation is to take everything out of your machine, put this card first, and then add any other cards you want after that. On a 2019 Mac Pro, whenever you add a new PCI-express card, go to System Preferences Expansion Slot Utility and make sure you are using Automatic Bandwidth Configuration unless you really know what you're doing. Especially on lower end configs, there are only so many PCI-express lanes to your processor, so you want to make sure your high bandwidth devices like GPUs and SSDs are using Pool A. Oversubscribing pool B is usually okay, as that is the one accounting for all of your Thunderbolt ports, which are most likely never going to be constantly utilizing full bandwidth allocated to them. However, ultimately, if everything looks green like in this screenshot here, you're good to go. As a last check in the Mac hardware info, I just wanted to make sure I actually see 4 970 EVO Plus SSDs, and that is the case. The other 4 SSDs on generic SSD controller are those belonging to OWC Accelsior, which also has 4 2TB SSDs. Mac's disk utility also confirms 4 970 EVO drives, so we're gonna click on the first one and erase it so that we can benchmark performance of a single drive through this card and get some baseline. The format as usual just takes a few seconds to complete. However, let's see what we should expect. Samsung advertises that this particular drive should have sequential read speeds of about 3500 megabytes per second and sequential writes of 3300. If we use our trusted Blackmagic disk speed test and select the Samsung drive from the list and run the benchmark, we will see that we're getting about 3080 megabytes per second write speeds and about 3020 megabytes per second reads on this single drive. Not quite at the maximum theoretical speeds, however, well within the limits of what we expected. With that done, I'm going to open Apple's disk utility and utilize the RAID assistant to create a RAID 0 or a striped volume using 2 Samsung 970 EVO Plus drives. This provides us a 4TB volume, and we're going to be using a chunk size of 128 kilobytes, which is the usual thing you would want to do for editing videos or storing some decently larger files, which we all do nowadays. Back in Blackmagic, we're going to select this new volume and run the speed test. And as you can see, we're getting about 5150 megabytes per second writes and about 5300 megabytes per second read speeds. In some ideal world, 2 drives would give you the same performance as 2 individual drives do. In the world we live in, 85% of that performance is what we get, and it's really what's expected. So now I'm going to delete this RAID set, and then I'm going to go and create a new Stripe 0 utilizing 4 Samsung 970 EVO Plus SSDs. So this time we're adding 2 extra drives into RAID 0, creating an 8TB volume. We're again using 128 kilobytes for the chunk size and just normal OS extended journal file system. So same drill, Blackmagic disk speed test. We're selecting this new volume with 4 SSDs and let's see what happens. Wow! 6700 megabytes per second in writes and about 8000 megabytes per second reads. That's really nice. So that's just with 4 drives, and if you really think about it, and if you watch my previous review of the OWC Accelsior, this is actually a little bit faster than the Accelsior can do. Just for fun, let's delete this RAID and actually create another one, which is also possible with 4 drives, which is called JBOD, which is a concatenated set of 4 drives. JBOD stands for just a bunch of disks, or as I like to call it, just a bunch of dumb. I really don't know why this even exists, it's completely useless in my opinion. In this case, you still get an 8TB volume, however, all disks in a JBOD are actually filled sequentially versus with RAID 0 where they are written to and read from at the same time. So as you can see, we're getting about 3 GB per second writes and even less reads than a single drive can provide. So I really don't know why JBOD exists, so if you're gonna do this, just use RAID 0. For those who would like some redundancy in here, we're going to create a RAID mirror, and in this case we're going to do it with 4 SSDs. This is what I call Paranoia Mirror. You're actually mirroring everything written to a single drive 3 more times. So you really get just 2TB volume. Everything you write to this volume has 3 other copies. This is probably an overkill for everything other than maybe storing your Bitcoin wallet. So let's see how it performs. As you can see, the writes are pretty much as fast as a single drive, maybe a little slower. However, in a mirror, you get the benefit of reading your data from the number of drives you have in a mirror. And in this case, we have 4, so we're actually hitting about 7 GB per second reading from the mirror. Now, how about RAID 10, or really RAID 10 as everybody else calls it? RAID 10 is really when you have two pairs of mirrors and then you're striping across them using RAID 0. In this case, we have to actually create it in two steps. In the first step, we're going to create a mirror of two 970 EVOs. This particular volume will be the left side of our RAID 10 array. All the settings are the same as before, we're just creating a 2 TB volume in this case. Now, let's create a second pair. Second pair is identical to the first one, we're just selecting the other two 970 EVO drives, selecting the same chunk size and just naming it R1-02 so we know which one it is. Now we simply have to stripe across these two mirrored volumes. So we're going to create a RAID 0 stripe, selecting R101 and R102. Now let's give it the most difficult name to remember. Instead of just calling it RAID 10, select the proper chunk size. It should match whatever your mirrors have underneath, which is 128 kilobytes here, and create our 4 TB RAID 10 volume. Yep, you heard that right. In a RAID 10, we get half of the available storage of all drives. Same drill as before, we're going to select this new volume in our disk speed test and run the benchmark. So what's the final tally here? Seems like we're getting about 4550 MB per second writes and about 7360 MB per second reads. So our writes are about 32% slower than RAID 0, and our reads are only about 10% slower than RAID 0. So this particular RAID is great if you want speed as well as protection from losing a drive, or in a special case you could even lose two drives as long as they are from a different mirrored set and still not lose any data. However, it will cost you 50% of your storage capacity in order to do that. To make this test fully complete, I also created a RAID 5 volume. Since Apple does not support RAID 5 in its own disk utilities, I used the soft RAID to do this. In RAID 5, we get 6 TB usable, and I'm still using 128 kilobit block size as we did in all the previous tests. So what does Blackmagic have to say? Well, it looks like that 4 2 TB Samsung EVO Plus in RAID 5 give us about 1100 MB per second writes and 5600 MB per second reads. For the very last test, let's do a bit more of a real-world example. Both Accelsior and Squid are in RAID 0, 8 TB on each volume, and we're going to take this video folder, which is 6.49 TB, and copy it from Squid to Accelsior 4M2. We'll see how long this takes, and then we're gonna do the same thing going backwards and see which of these drives can actually write faster. And here we are. We'll call this one 37 minutes even because I started it 5 seconds before the copy process began. I wiped the Squid here as the Accelsior was mostly unoccupied for its test. It had about 400 GB or some such, but that's really nothing. While temperatures were decently high on my SSDs on the Squid, I did not go into it because it did not affect performance whatsoever. And there we have it, 32 minutes and 37 seconds going from Accelsior to the Squid. So what are the results really? Accelsior wrote 6.4 TB in 37 minutes even at 29-23 MB per second, and Squid wrote them at 32 minutes and 37 seconds, which comes to about 3,316 MB per second. The difference comes to 393 MB per second, which is about 12 to 13% of speed. There is also another metric. Both of these drives are very capable, however, the Squid costs $2,296, where Accelsior is $1,979. Squid is a little bit more capable, faster, expandable, and then once you expand it much faster, where on the other side, Accelsior is a bit more affordable. You have only one warranty claim to deal with instead of individual components on the Squid, and it has much better cooling. The difference is $317. Well, there you have it. I hope this is enough info for you to decide which one you want. I personally use Squid as my primary drive and Accelsior as my secondary because I find it a little bit faster and quicker and more consistent with speed when it comes to editing videos and whatnot. please like and subscribe, and thanks for watching.